The person you never said goodbye to. It was never the breakup. It was never the funeral. It was never the day you failed. Those were only the moments you noticed. The real change had already begun long before any of them. It's 1:17 in the morning. The room is silent except for the faint glow of your phone. You aren't searching for anything important. Just scrolling. One photo after another. A birthday you barely remember. Coffee with friends. A random Tuesday that once felt completely ordinary. Then, your thumb stops. Not because the picture is extraordinary, but because the person smiling back at you feels strangely unfamiliar. You don't study the background. You don't notice what you're wearing. You keep looking at your own face. There is something in those eyes. A kind of lightness. A quiet confidence. The effortless way you smiled before every conversation became something to overthink. Before disappointment taught you to expect less. Before protecting yourself became second nature. Without realizing it, you whisper a sentence you never thought you would say. I miss this person, not someone else. Yourself. That may be one of the loneliest experiences a human being can have. Missing someone who is still alive. Because the hardest goodbyes are rarely spoken out loud. Sometimes, they happen so slowly that you don't even notice you're saying goodbye. Not to another person, but to parts of yourself. The version that trusted easily. The version that believed love would stay if you gave enough of it. The version that walked into rooms without wondering whether they belonged there. Most people assume these parts simply disappear. Psychology tells a more complicated story. Human beings rarely change in a single dramatic moment. We change through repetition. One disappointment becomes caution. Caution becomes distance. Distance becomes habit. And habits quietly become identity. No alarm goes off. No one pulls you aside and says, "You're becoming someone different." Life simply keeps moving. You still answer messages. You still show up for work. You still laugh when everyone else laughs. But if someone asked when you last felt completely like yourself, the answer might take longer than you expected. That is why so many people believe something inside them has been broken, because they confuse change with damage. But those are not the same thing. A forest after a wildfire does not look the way it once did. Yet beneath the ashes, thousands of seeds wait for the intense heat that allows them to open for the first time. Without the fire, the new forest would never exist. Nature has always understood something we struggle to accept. Growth and loss often arrive holding the same hand. Centuries ago, in Japan, people found themselves facing a similar question. What should become of something beautiful after it has been broken? Legend tells of Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who treasured a simple tea bowl. When it accidentally shattered, he sent it away, hoping skilled craftsmen could restore it exactly as it had been before. When the bowl returned, it was usable, but something essential had disappeared. The cracks had been hidden with rough metal staples. It was repaired, yet it no longer felt beautiful. Unsatisfied, Japanese artisans searched for another answer. Instead of disguising the damage, they mixed precious gold into lacquer and carefully traced every fracture by hand. They refused to erase the bowl's history. They chose to honor it. The cracks were no longer evidence of failure. They became evidence of survival. Perhaps that is where so many of us have misunderstood our own lives. We spend years wishing we could become the person we were before heartbreak, before grief, before rejection, as though healing means returning to a version of ourselves that no longer exists. But maybe healing has never been about going back. Maybe it has always been about becoming someone who can carry every crack, without believing those cracks have made them worth less. Because one day, you may look back at every moment that seemed to destroy you, and realize they were quietly introducing you to the person you were always becoming. What the cracks were actually building. Several months later, someone sits across from you. They've barely spoken for 5 minutes. Then they suddenly apologize. "I'm sorry. I don't even know why I'm telling you all this." You smile. Because you do. Not the details. The feeling. The exhaustion hidden behind their calm voice. The quiet shame they tried to disguise with a laugh. Years ago, you would have searched for advice. the right words, the perfect solution. Now, you simply stay. You let the silence breathe. You don't rush to rescue them from it. Because somewhere along the way, you learn that some pain doesn't need to be interrupted. It only needs to be witnessed. That's when something unexpected becomes impossible to ignore. The experiences you spent years wishing had never happened are quietly changing the way you exist in other people's lives. Not because they made you harder, but because they made you gentler. Psychologists have a name for this transformation: post-traumatic growth. It doesn't mean suffering is secretly good. It doesn't mean trauma is a gift. It means that after life tears apart the assumptions you once lived by, you don't simply rebuild the same person. You rebuild with different materials, different priorities, different eyes, different boundaries. The pain wasn't the lesson. The rebuilding was. Think about a forest after wildfire. For weeks, it looks like death. Black soil, silent trees, nothing but ash. If someone walked through it that day, they would swear nothing beautiful could ever grow there again. But underneath the surface, the fire has already begun changing the earth. Some seeds remain sealed for years, waiting for temperatures only fire can create. Without the flames, they never open. The destruction wasn't the miracle. What the destruction awakened was, maybe human beings are more like forests than we realize. We stand in the ashes of our own lives, thinking we've reached the end, while something inside us has only just begun. There's something else the fire changes. Not just what grows back, but what you choose to plant. Before everything fell apart, most of us were living by a quiet checklist we never actually wrote ourselves. Look successful. Look put together. Look like someone who has it figured out. Then the fire came, and none of it held. The image didn't comfort you at 2 a.m. At 2 in the morning, you weren't thinking about promotions, or followers, or whether strangers admired your life. You were sitting on the kitchen floor, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold, wondering why success felt so heavy, and peace felt so far away. The approval didn't sit with you in the silence, so you were left with something smaller, something quieter, a question you'd spent years avoiding. What do I actually need to feel like myself again? Not what looks right, not what everyone else seems to want. What's real? For some people, the answer was smaller than they expected. Maybe it happened over coffee. You finally stopped pretending. You told someone the truth you'd rehearsed 100 times in your head. You waited for them to judge you, to fix you, to tell you everything would be okay. Instead, they simply listened. For the first time in a long time, you didn't feel like a problem that needed solving. You felt like a person. That's the strange gift hidden inside the wreckage. It burns away everything that was never really yours to begin with. The performance you built for an audience instead of for yourself. What's left afterward isn't less. It's just finally, uncomfortably, true. This is also why the people who've been through something rarely chase the same things anymore. They stop mistaking attention for love. They no longer panic when someone walks away, because they've already survived losing the people they thought they couldn't live without. And strangely, life continued. Not perfectly, not easily, but it continued. That realization changes everything. So here is what the fire actually leaves behind, if you let it. Not just seeds that grow into something new, but the wisdom to know which ones are worth planting. You don't rebuild the exact forest that burned down. You build the one that was always meant to grow there. Once everything false had finally cleared away, perhaps that was never the purpose of the fire. Not to punish you, not to erase you, but to leave behind only the parts of your life that could survive the truth. Because when the smoke finally clears, you don't miss every tree that burned. You simply become grateful for the ones still standing. And for the first time, you know exactly where to begin again. The person you're becoming. One day, without planning to, you'll catch yourself laughing. Not politely, not because someone expected you to, really laughing. And for one strange second, you'll stop, because the sound doesn't feel unfamiliar anymore. You won't think, I'm finally happy. You'll think something much quieter. I haven't checked whether I'm broken today. And that's when you'll realize, healing had been happening while you were busy looking for proof that it wasn't. No one tells you healing doesn't arrive the way breaking did. Breaking has a date, a phone call, a diagnosis, a door that closed. Healing has no date. It doesn't happen on a Tuesday. It happens across hundreds of Tuesdays you weren't paying attention to. One afternoon, someone mentions their name. You wait for the familiar ache. It doesn't come. The conversation simply keeps moving. And for a second, you realize, so have you. The washing machine finishes. A neighbor closes a gate. Someone laughs outside. Life keeps happening. One day, you'll realize you no longer reread that old conversation. You no longer rehearse the argument in the shower. You no longer imagine what you should have said. Not because you've forgotten, because your life has quietly become more interesting than your pain. Think about a scar. It never disappears. If you look closely, you'll always find it. But there comes a day when you stop touching it every morning. Not because it's gone, because it no longer asks for your attention. Healing often looks exactly like that. Not an ending, a softening. Here's what that means for you. You are allowed to stop waiting for the moment you feel fully healed before you start living like someone worth being. That moment isn't coming. Not because healing is a lie, but because it was never a finish line to begin with. It was never a before and after. It's the walking. So if you're reading this on a day that doesn't feel like progress, a day where the scar still pulls when the weather changes, that doesn't mean the gold wasn't real. It means you're still mid-repair, still being traced, one fracture at a time, by hands more patient than you'll ever fully see. Maybe you'll find that old photograph again someday, the one you couldn't stop looking at. The younger version of you will still be smiling. Nothing about the picture will have changed. Only the person holding it will. This time, you won't whisper, "I miss this person." You'll smile back, quietly, gratefully, because you'll finally understand. You didn't lose them. They were simply the beginning of you. And every crack that came afterward didn't erase your story. It continued it. The opposite of broken isn't perfect. It's integrated. Part 4. What you do with the gold. One day, you'll notice something that would have been impossible a year ago. Someone else's pain no longer scares you. Not because you've become stronger, because you've stopped believing pain always needs to be escaped. You know now, sometimes, it simply needs company. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's your own child, years from now, sitting on the edge of their bed the way you once sat on yours. They won't say much at first. Just, "I don't know why I feel like this." And you'll feel something strange move through you. Not panic. Not the urge to fix it. Something closer to recognition. Like meeting someone in a language you didn't know you still spoke. Carl Jung wrote about a figure he called the wounded healer. Someone whose deepest wound, once understood rather than hidden, became the very place from which they could understand others. Not because suffering automatically creates wisdom. It doesn't. Some pain only makes people bitter. The difference is what happened after the wound. Did it close your heart? Or quietly teach it how to stay open? Imagine pouring hot tea into a repaired bowl. Steam rises from the cup. The warmth moves gently across the golden seams. Yet nothing spills. The bowl still holds. Not despite its fractures, but with them. Maybe that's the part of this story you weren't expecting. The point was never to become unbreakable. It was never to reach some finish line where nothing can touch you again. The point was to become someone who could sit next to another person's fracture, without flinching, without rushing them, without needing them to hurry up and be okay. Because you remember what it felt like when no one could do that for you. So when it's your turn, and it will be your turn, you won't tell them. Everything happens for a reason. Because sometimes it doesn't. You won't promise, "You'll be okay." Because you can't know that yet. Instead, you'll notice they're staring at the floor, twisting their hands together, looking for words that refuse to come. So you'll pull your chair a little closer. Not to rescue them, just to make sure they don't feel alone while they're looking. You won't search for perfect words. You won't rush to make the pain disappear. You'll simply stay. Because you finally understand something no one could have explained to you before. Presence heals what explanations never could. Maybe that's what the gold was for all along. Not to prove the bowl had survived, but to make sure it could still be placed in someone's hands. Without fear. Perhaps healing has never been about becoming untouchable. Perhaps it has always been about becoming safe enough for someone else to set down their pain beside yours. And if that day ever comes, you'll realize the cracks were never the end of your story. They were the place where someone else's hope quietly began. The 4 things you carry. Maybe one day, you'll find that old photograph again, the one you once stared at in silence. At 1:17 in the morning, half a lifetime ago, you'll smile at the person in it. Not with grief this time, with something quieter. Recognition. You'll set the photograph down, and for a moment, you'll remember the fire. Not the one that hurt you, the one that cleared the ground for something you couldn't have grown any other way. You won't flinch at the memory anymore. You'll just nod, the way you'd nod at an old teacher. Your hand will move, almost without thinking, to the small scar you still carry somewhere. Maybe it's visible. Maybe it's the kind no one else can see. You won't touch it to check if it still hurts. You already know it doesn't ask for your attention anymore. You touch it now the way you'd touch a photograph, just to remember it's part of the story. Then you'll reach for your cup of tea. The window is open. Morning air slips quietly into the room, warmth moving gently across the golden seams. And without even thinking, you'll wrap both hands around it. For years, you thought you had been carrying all of these things. The photograph, the fire, the scar, the bowl. But perhaps they were carrying you. The photograph kept you connected to who you once were. The fire refused to let you settle for what wasn't true. The scar reminded you how much you could survive. And the gold kept proving that broken things could still hold warmth. Maybe that's why you never truly fell apart. You were being held, long before you knew how to hold yourself. Maybe none of this feels true to you yet. Maybe your pain still feels too close. Maybe hearing that wounds can become gold sounds insulting. That's okay. If today is still the worst day you've ever lived, none of these words are meant to rush you. No one can borrow hope from the future. We only ever believe what today allows us to believe. Perhaps one day, this story will find you again. And perhaps it will sound different then. The tea is still warm. The photograph is still there. The scar hasn't disappeared. Neither have the golden lines. Nothing about your story was erased. Only your way of carrying it changed. And perhaps that is what healing has always looked like. Not a life without cracks. A life no longer afraid of them. Tonight, if you happen to wake at 1:17 again, the photograph will still be there. So will the tea. This time, you'll know why your hand reaches for a different one.